The sun had barely risen over the James River, casting a golden glow over the English settlements when the screams began. The air was crisp, with a hint of wood smoke and damp earth as the Native American warriors emerged from the forest, their faces painted with fierce determination. The sound of drums and war cries echoed through the valley, a cacophony of terror that shattered the morning calm. Chief Opechancanough, his eyes blazing with a deep-seated fury, led the charge, his warriors fanning out behind him like a deadly storm. The English colonists, caught off guard, stumbled from their homes, bleary-eyed and bewildered, as the Native Americans descended upon them with a ferocity that seemed almost otherworldly. The clash of steel on steel rang out, a harsh, jarring sound that seemed to shatter the very air itself, as the two forces met in a frenzy of violence. The scent of blood and sweat hung heavy over the battlefield, a noxious miasma that clung to every surface as the warriors fought with a primal intensity that seemed to shake the earth. The English colonists, vastly outnumbered, fought valiantly, but they were no match for the Native American warriors, who seemed to be everywhere at once, their tomahawks rising and falling with deadly precision. The sound of screams and wails filled the air, a haunting melody that seemed to echo through the valley as the English settlements were overrun, their inhabitants cut down with ruthless efficiency. The earth was cool and damp beneath the feet of the warriors, a stark contrast to the heat of the battle, as they fought their way through the English settlements, leaving a trail of death and destruction in their wake. The sun beat down upon them, casting long shadows across the ground, as the battle raged on, a seemingly endless torrent of violence and bloodshed. But to understand how we got here, to comprehend the depths of fury and desperation that drove Chief Opechancanough and his warriors to launch this devastating attack, we must journey back in time to the early days of the English colonization of Virginia and the complex, often fraught relationship between the English and the Native Americans. In the warm, golden light of a Virginia autumn, the James River flowed gently, its tranquil surface reflecting the lush green forests that lined its banks. The air was alive with the sweet scent of blooming flowers and the earthy smell of fallen leaves as the trees stood tall, their leaves rustling softly in the breeze. It was a time of peace, a time of plenty, and the Native American tribes that lived along the river's banks had grown accustomed to the gentle rhythms of the land. Chief Powhatan, a wise and just leader, ruled over the Powhatan Confederacy, a powerful alliance of tribes that controlled much of the region. His eyes, deep and knowing, seemed to hold the wisdom of the ages, and his voice, low and soothing, could calm the most troubled of minds. As the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow over the landscape, the sound of laughter and music carried on the wind, mingling with the scent of roasting meats and freshly baked bread. The Native Americans had lived in harmony with the land for generations, their lives a testament to the beauty and wonder of the natural world. But amidst this peace, a sense of unease had begun to grow. The English had arrived, their ships anchoring in the river's mouth, their settlers establishing a foothold on the land. The sound of their hammering and sawing, the smell of their smoke and sweat, had begun to disrupt the delicate balance of the ecosystem. Chief Powhatan's daughter, Pocahontas, a young woman with a wild heart and a spirit that could not be tamed, had taken a liking to the English and had even formed a close bond with one of their leaders, John Smith. Her laughter, bright and infectious, could light up the darkest of rooms, and her eyes, sparkling with mischief, seemed to hold 1,000 secrets. But not all of the Native Americans shared Pocahontas's enthusiasm for the English. Chief Opechancanough, a younger brother of Chief Powhatan, had grown increasingly wary of the settlers and had begun to speak out against their presence. His voice, low and urgent, carried a sense of warning, a sense of danger that could not be ignored. He saw the English as a threat to the very way of life that the Native Americans had known for generations. The sound of his words echoing through the forests seemed to awaken a sense of unease, a sense of foreboding that hung in the air like a challenge. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks turned into months, the tensions between the English and the Native Americans continued to grow. The English, with their strange customs and their insatiable hunger for land, seemed to be always pushing, always probing, always seeking to expand their settlements and their influence. The Native Americans, with their deep connection to the land and their rich cultural heritage, seemed to be always resisting, always pushing back, always seeking to protect their way of life. The air was thick with tension, the smell of smoke and sweat hanging heavy over the landscape. The sound of drums, beating in the distance, seemed to echo through the forests, a call to arms, a call to action. It was a time of great uncertainty, a time of great change, and the people of Virginia were caught in the midst of it, unsure of what the future held. Chief Powhatan, wise and just, sought to navigate the treacherous waters of diplomacy, seeking to find a way to coexist with the English, to find a way to preserve the peace. But Chief Opechancanough, young and impulsive, seemed to be driven by a different spirit, a spirit of resistance, of defiance, of war. The earth beneath their feet seemed to tremble, as if the very land itself was awakening, stirring from a deep slumber. The trees, tall and silent, seemed to loom over the landscape, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. As the seasons passed, the tensions between the English and the Native Americans continued to grow. The English, with their superior firepower and their seemingly endless supply of settlers, seemed to be always gaining the upper hand. The Native Americans, with their deep connection to the land and their rich cultural heritage, seemed to be always losing ground. It was a slow and painful process, a process of displacement, of marginalization, of destruction. The sound of weeping, echoing through the forests, seemed to hang in the air, a haunting reminder of the tragedy that was unfolding. The smell of smoke and ash, carried on the wind, seemed to cling to the skin, a constant reminder of the destruction that had been wrought. And yet, even in the midst of this chaos, there were moments of beauty, moments of wonder. The sun rising over the horizon seemed to cast a golden glow over the landscape, a glow that seemed to illuminate the very soul. The stars, twinkling in the night sky, seemed to whisper secrets to the wind, secrets that only the trees could hear. The world was a complex and mysterious place, full of contradictions and paradoxes. The English and the Native Americans, two cultures so different, so disparate, seemed to be caught in a dance of life and death, of struggle and survival. The music of the spheres, echoing through the universe, seemed to be a reminder of the beauty and the wonder of it all. A reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always hope. The sound of a gentle stream babbling through the forest seemed to be a lullaby that rocked the world to sleep, a lullaby that seemed to whisper secrets to the soul. As the night wore on, the darkness deepened, the shadows lengthened, and the world seemed to slow down, as if it too were falling asleep, as if it too were surrendering to the inevitable. The last sound, echoing through the forest, was the sound of a lonely bird singing a soft melody, a melody that seemed to whisper goodbye, a melody that seemed to fade away into the darkness, leaving only the silence, the stillness, and the quiet of the night. As the years passed, the English colonies in Virginia continued to grow, with the Jamestown settlement at its center. The sound of axes chopping wood and the smell of freshly cut timber filled the air, as the English colonists worked tirelessly to build their new homes. The James River, which had once seemed like a barrier, now became a lifeline, providing a means of transportation and trade with the Native American tribes. Chief Powhatan, who had initially been wary of the English, had begun to see the benefits of trade and had even formed an alliance with them. His daughter, Pocahontas, had become a symbol of this alliance, and her marriage to John Rolfe, an English colonist, had helped to strengthen the bonds between the two cultures. But despite this progress, tensions between the English and the Native Americans continued to simmer just below the surface. The English had begun to expand their settlements, encroaching on Native American lands and disrupting their way of life. The Native Americans, who had once been so welcoming, began to feel like they were being pushed out of their own territory. The air was thick with tension, and the sound of drums beating in the distance seemed to grow louder, a reminder of the growing unease. Chief Opechancanough, who had succeeded Chief Powhatan as the leader of the Powhatan Confederacy, watched with growing concern as the English continued to expand their settlements. He knew that the English were not just settling in Virginia, but were also seeking to exert their control over the Native American tribes. As the English colonies grew, so did their ambition. They began to see themselves as the dominant power in the region, and they started to exert their control over the Native American tribes. The sound of English voices, raised in argument and debate, filled the air as they discussed the best way to govern their new territory. The smell of smoke from their pipes and the feel of their rough-hewn clothing seemed to symbolize their growing sense of self-importance. But the Native Americans were not about to give up their land without a fight. They had lived in Virginia for generations, and they were determined to protect their way of life. The sound of their war cries, echoing through the forest, sent shivers down the spines of the English colonists. In the years leading up to the massacre, the tensions between the English and the Native Americans continued to escalate. The English had begun to take more and more land, and the Native Americans were starting to feel like they were being pushed out of their own territory. The air was thick with tension, and the sound of drums beating in the distance seemed to grow louder, a reminder of the growing unease. Chief Opechancanough knew that something had to be done, or else the English would continue to expand their settlements and exert their control over the Native American tribes. He began to plan a surprise attack on the English settlements, one that would catch them off guard and give the Native Americans the upper hand. The planning of the attack was a painstaking process, with Chief Opechancanough and his advisors working tirelessly to gather intelligence and coordinate their efforts. The sound of whispers and murmurs filled the air as they discussed their plans in hushed tones. The smell of smoke from their pipes and the feel of their rough-hewn clothing seemed to symbolize their growing sense of determination. They knew that the English were not to be underestimated, and that they would put up a fierce fight if they were attacked. But Chief Opechancanough was confident in his plan, and he knew that the Native Americans had the advantage of surprise on their side. As the day of the attack approached, the tension in the air grew thicker. The English colonists were unaware of the danger that was lurking in the shadows, and they continued to go about their daily business as usual. The sound of their laughter and chatter filled the air, and the smell of freshly baked bread wafted from the ovens. But Chief Opechancanough and his warriors were waiting, their hearts pounding with anticipation. They knew that the attack would be a turning point in the history of the English colonies, and they were determined to make it a day that would be remembered for generations to come. The sun was rising over the James River, casting a golden glow over the English settlements. The air was crisp and cool, with a hint of spring in the breeze. The sound of birds singing and the gentle lapping of the water against the shore created a sense of peace and tranquility. But beneath the surface, the tensions between the English and the Native Americans were simmering, waiting to boil over into violence. The stage was set for a conflict that would change the course of history, and the players were all in place, waiting for the cue to begin. The sound of a drumbeat, distant but growing louder, seemed to echo through the forest, a reminder of the impending doom that was to come. As the English colonists went about their daily business, they were unaware of the danger that was lurking in the shadows. They were confident in their own strength and their ability to defend themselves, and they saw the Native Americans as inferior and weak. But Chief Opechancanough and his warriors were not weak, and they were determined to prove it. They had been planning their attack for months, and they were ready to strike at a moment's notice. The sound of their war cries, echoing through the forest, sent shivers down the spines of the English colonists, and they knew that they were in for the fight of their lives. The English colonists were scattered throughout the settlements, some working in the fields, others tending to their homes and families. They were unaware of the danger that was lurking in the shadows, and they were caught off guard when the Native American warriors launched their surprise attack. The sound of screams and shouts filled the air, and the smell of smoke and blood wafted through the streets. The English colonists were quickly overwhelmed, and they were unable to defend themselves against the fierce and determined Native American warriors. As the attack continued, The English colonists were forced to flee for their lives. They ran through the streets, screaming and shouting, as the Native American warriors chased after them. The sound of drums and war cries filled the air, and the smell of smoke and blood hung heavy over the settlements. The English colonists were terrified, and they knew that they were in grave danger. They had never seen the Native Americans so fierce and determined, and they knew that they were fighting for their lives. The attack on the English settlements was a surprise, and it caught the colonists off guard. They were quickly overwhelmed, and they were unable to defend themselves against the fierce and determined Native American warriors. The sound of screams and shouts filled the air, and the smell of smoke and blood wafted through the streets. The English colonists were forced to flee for their lives, and they ran through the streets, screaming and shouting as the Native American warriors chased after them. The stage was set for a conflict that would change the course of history, and the players were all in place, waiting for the cue to begin. The sound of a drum beat, distant but growing louder, seemed to echo through the forest, a reminder of the impending doom that was to come. As the sun began to set on the English settlements, the Native American warriors had already begun to withdraw, their mission accomplished. The English colonists were left to survey the damage, and they were shocked and horrified by what they saw. The sound of weeping and wailing filled the air, and the smell of smoke and blood hung heavy over the settlements. The English colonists knew that they had been dealt a devastating blow, and they were determined to respond with force. They began to plan their revenge, and they vowed to make the Native Americans pay for their attack. The aftermath of the massacre was marked by a significant increase in tensions between the English and the Native Americans. The English colonists were angry and hurt, and they were determined to take revenge on the Native Americans. The sound of drums and war cries filled the air, and the smell of smoke and blood hung heavy over the settlements. The Native Americans, on the other hand, were confident and determined, and they knew that they had struck a blow for their freedom and their way of life. The stage was set for a conflict that would change the course of history, and the players were all in place, waiting for the cue to begin. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, the conflict between the English and the Native Americans continued to escalate. The English colonists launched a series of retaliatory raids against the Native American tribes, and the Native Americans responded with fierce and determined resistance. The sound of war cries and drums filled the air, and the smell of smoke and blood hung heavy over the settlements. The conflict was brutal and intense, and it seemed to have no end in sight. The English colonists were determined to assert their dominance over the Native Americans, and the Native Americans were determined to resist their oppression. As the conflict continued, the English colonists began to realize that they were in for a long and brutal fight. They had underestimated the determination and the strength of the Native Americans, and they were now paying the price. The sound of war cries and drums filled the air, and the smell of smoke and blood hung heavy over the settlements. The English colonists were tired and weary, and they were beginning to lose hope. But they refused to give up, and they continued to fight on, determined to assert their dominance over the Native Americans. The conflict between the English and the Native Americans was a turning point in the history of the English colonies. It marked the beginning of a long and brutal struggle for dominance, and it would have far-reaching consequences for both the English and the Native Americans. The sound of war cries and drums filled the air, and the smell of smoke and blood hung heavy over the settlements. The stage was set for a conflict that would change the course of history, and the players were all in place, waiting for the cue to begin. The sound of a drum beat, distant but growing louder, seemed to echo through the forest, a reminder of the impending doom that was to come. As the sun began to set on the English settlements, the English colonists were left to survey the damage and to wonder what the future held. They had been dealt a devastating blow, and they were determined to respond with force. The sound of weeping and wailing filled the air, and the smell of smoke and blood hung heavy over the settlements. The English colonists knew that they had been changed forever, and they were determined to make the Native Americans pay for their attack. The stage was set for a conflict that would change the course of history, and the players were all in place, waiting for the cue to begin. The sound of a drumbeat, distant but growing louder, seemed to echo through the forest, a reminder of the impending doom that was to come. The English colonists were left to pick up the pieces and to try to rebuild their lives. They were shocked and horrified by what had happened, and they were determined to make sure that it never happened again. The sound of hammers and saws filled the air as they worked to rebuild their homes and their settlements. The smell of freshly cut wood and the feel of rough-hewn stone seemed to symbolize their determination to rebuild and to start anew. But the memory of the massacre would never be forgotten, and it would continue to haunt the English colonists for generations to come. As the years passed, the English colonies in Virginia continued to grow and to prosper. The sound of axes chopping wood and the smell of freshly cut timber filled the air as the English colonists worked tirelessly to build their new homes. The James River, which had once seemed like a barrier, now became a lifeline, providing a means of transportation and trade with the Native American tribes. But the memory of the massacre would never be forgotten, and it would continue to haunt the English colonists for generations to come. The sound of a drumbeat, distant but growing louder, seemed to echo through the forest, a reminder of the impending doom that was to come. The sun was setting over the English settlements, casting a golden glow over the landscape. The air was crisp and cool, with a hint of spring in the breeze. The sound of birds singing and the gentle lapping of the water against the shore created a sense of peace and tranquility. But beneath the surface, the tensions between the English and the Native Americans were still simmering, waiting to boil over into violence. The stage was set for a conflict that would change the course of history, and the players were all in place, waiting for the cue to begin. The sound of a drumbeat, distant but growing louder, seemed to echo through the forest, a reminder of the impending doom that was to come. And as the darkness fell, the English colonists knew that they would never be able to forget the lessons of the past, and that they would always be haunted by the memory of the massacre. The sun had barely risen over the James River on March 22, 1622, casting a pale light over the English settlements. The air was crisp, with a hint of wood smoke and the sweet scent of blooming trees. But amidst the peaceful morning, a sense of unease settled over the colonists. They had been on edge for weeks, ever since Chief Opechancanough had begun to secretly gather his warriors, planning a surprise attack on the English. As the day wore on, the tension only grew. The sound of birds chirping and the gentle lapping of the river against the shore were the only sounds that broke the silence. But then, without warning, the stillness was shattered by the cries of the Native American warriors. The attack had begun. The English colonists, caught off guard, scrambled to defend themselves, but they were vastly outnumbered. The sound of screams, clashing steel, and the scent of blood filled the air. Chief Opechancanough, his face painted with fierce determination, led the charge. His warriors, armed with bows, arrows, and spears, descended upon the English settlements, leaving destruction in their wake. The English, trying to defend their homes and families, fought back with muskets and swords, but they were no match for the sheer number of attackers. The ground was soon slick with blood, and the air was thick with the smell of death. As the day wore on, the carnage only intensified. The English colonists, many of whom were women and children, were cut down without mercy. The sound of their screams still echoes through the annals of history, a haunting reminder of the brutality of that day. The attack was relentless, with the Native American warriors showing no quarter. They burned homes, destroyed crops, and slaughtered livestock, leaving the English colonists to face a desperate struggle for survival. The human cost of the attack was staggering. Approximately 347 English colonists were killed, which was about a quarter of the English population in Virginia at the time. The survivors, many of whom were wounded, were left to pick up the pieces and try to make sense of the devastation. The once thriving settlements were now nothing more than smoldering ruins, a testament to the ferocity of the attack. The James River, which had once been a symbol of hope and prosperity, was now a reminder of the bloodshed and violence that had occurred on its banks. As the sun began to set on that fateful day, the English colonists were left to survey the damage. The landscape, once green and lush, was now scarred and blackened. The air was heavy with the smell of smoke and death, and the sound of mourning filled the air. The survivors, many of whom had lost loved ones, were left to wonder if they would ever be able to rebuild and recover from the devastation. The attack had left them shaken, and the future looked uncertain. In the days and weeks that followed, the English colonists struggled to come to terms with what had happened. They had been caught off guard, and the attack had left them reeling. The survivors, many of whom were wounded, were forced to fend for themselves, struggling to find food and shelter in a landscape that had been ravaged by war. The English government, upon hearing of the attack, was quick to respond, sending troops and supplies to aid the beleaguered colonists. But for many, it was too little, too late. The damage had been done, and the consequences of the attack would be felt for years to come. As the months passed, the English colonists began to rebuild, but the memory of the attack lingered. The sound of the Native American warriors' cries, the scent of smoke and blood, and the feeling of desperation and fear would never be forgotten. The attack had changed everything, marking a turning point in the history of the English colonies. The relationship between the English and the Native Americans would never be the same, and the legacy of the Jamestown Massacre of 1622 would continue to shape the course of American history. The years that followed were marked by increased tensions and conflict between the English and the Native Americans. The English, determined to expand their settlements and establish trade relationships with the Native Americans, were met with resistance and violence. The Native Americans, who had been subject to English violence and exploitation, were determined to protect their lands and way of life. The conflict escalated into a full-scale war known as the Anglo-Powhatan War, which lasted for several years. The war had a devastating impact on the Native American populations, leading to the deaths of thousands of people and the destruction of many Native American communities. As the war raged on, the English colonists began to realize that their very survival depended on their ability to adapt and overcome. They had to learn to navigate the complex web of alliances and rivalries between the Native American tribes and to find ways to coexist with their Native American neighbors. But for many, it was too late. The damage had been done, and the consequences of the attack would be felt for generations to come. The Jamestown Massacre of 1622 had marked a turning point in the history of the English colonies, and its legacy would continue to shape the course of American history. The sun had long since set on that fateful day, casting a dark and foreboding shadow over the English settlements. The sound of the Native American warriors' cries had faded into the distance, but the memory of the attack would never be forgotten. The English colonists, who had once been so full of hope and promise, were now left to pick up the pieces and try to make sense of the devastation. The James River, which had once been a symbol of hope and prosperity, was now a reminder of the bloodshed and violence that had occurred on its banks. The legacy of the Jamestown Massacre of 1622 would continue to haunt the English colonies, a reminder of the devastating consequences of conflict and violence. As the last wisps of sunlight faded from the horizon, the English colonists, still reeling from the devastation of the massacre, struggled to come to terms with the new reality that had been thrust upon them. The once thriving settlements along the James River now lay in ruins, the air thick with the smell of smoke and sweat, the sounds of weeping and wailing echoing through the night. The survivors, huddled together in small groups, whispered among themselves, their voices barely audible over the crackling of fires as they tried to make sense of the chaos that had engulfed their lives. In the midst of this devastation, Chief Opechancanough, the mastermind behind the surprise attack, stood tall, his eyes fixed on the horizon, his mind racing with the implications of what had been achieved. The English, once a formidable foe, now lay broken and battered, their numbers depleted, their spirits crushed. The Powhatan Confederacy, on the other hand, had emerged victorious, their power and influence now unparalleled in the region. And yet, as the chief gazed out into the darkness, he knew that this was only the beginning. that the English would not take this defeat lying down, that they would regroup, rearm, and return, hungrier for revenge than ever before. As the days turned into weeks, the English colonists, led by the determined Governor Francis Wyatt, began to rebuild and recover, their efforts fueled by a growing sense of anger and resentment towards the Native Americans. The sound of hammers ringing against nails, the smell of freshly cut wood, and the sight of new buildings rising from the ashes all served as a testament to the English resolve to survive and thrive in this unforgiving land. But despite their progress, the memories of the massacre lingered, a constant reminder of the violence and bloodshed that had been unleashed upon them. The survivors, haunted by the ghosts of their dead, struggled to find peace, their dreams filled with the screams of the fallen, their waking hours marked by a deep-seated fear of another attack. In the midst of this turmoil, a young English colonist, barely out of his teenage years, found himself at the forefront of the conflict. His name was Nathaniel, and he had lost his family in the massacre. His parents and siblings cut down in the chaos, their bodies left to rot in the sun. Consumed by a burning desire for revenge, Nathaniel had dedicated himself to the cause of the English, determined to play his part in the struggle against the Native Americans. He spent his days training, honing his skills with a musket, and his nights patrolling the perimeter of the settlement, ever vigilant, always ready to strike. The sound of his footsteps, echoing through the darkness, the feel of the cold metal against his skin, and the smell of gunpowder all served as a reminder of his mission, a mission to avenge his family and to protect his people. As the months dragged on, the conflict between the English and the Native Americans continued to escalate, the two sides locked in a bitter struggle for control of the region. The English, fueled by their desire for revenge, launched a series of retaliatory raids against the Powhatan Confederacy, burning villages and crops and slaughtering anyone who stood in their way. The Native Americans, determined to defend their lands, fought back with equal ferocity, using their knowledge of the terrain to launch surprise attacks against the English. The sound of muskets firing, the smell of smoke and blood, and the sight of death and destruction all served as a reminder of the brutality and savagery of war. And yet, despite the violence and the bloodshed, there were those who still held out hope for a peaceful resolution. A small group of English colonists, led by a wise and aged minister, had begun to secretly meet with a delegation of Native American leaders, seeking to find a way to end the conflict and to forge a lasting peace. The meetings, held under the light of the full moon, took place in a secluded clearing, deep in the heart of the forest. The sound of leaves rustling, the smell of damp earth, and the sight of the stars twinkling above all served as a reminder of the beauty and the wonder of the natural world, a world that seemed to be slipping further and further away as the conflict continued to escalate. As the talks progressed, it became clear that the path to peace would be long and arduous, that the wounds of the past would not be easily healed, and that the scars of the massacre would take a long time to fade. But even in the face of such adversity, the participants in the talks remained committed to their goal, driven by a deep-seated desire to find a way to live in harmony, to find a way to forgive and to forget. The sound of their voices, whispering in the darkness, the feel of their hands, clasped together in a symbol of unity, and the sight of the moon shining down upon them, all served as a reminder of the power of hope and the human spirit. In the end, it was this hope, this glimmer of light in the darkness, that would ultimately decide the course of history, that would determine the fate of the English colonists and the Native Americans. The battle that had been waged, the blood that had been spilled, and the lives that had been lost would all be remembered, but it was the idea of peace, the idea of forgiveness, and the idea of reconciliation that would survive, that would endure, long after the conflict had faded into memory. The sound of silence, the feel of stillness, and the sight of a new dawn breaking on the horizon all served as a reminder of the possibility of a new beginning that would be born out of the ashes of the old, a new beginning that would be forged in the fire of hope and the human spirit. The sun rose over the James River, casting a pale light on the devastation that lay before it. The once thriving English settlements, now reduced to smoldering ruins, stood as a testament to the brutality of the massacre. The air reeked of smoke, sweat, and blood, a noxious odor that clung to every surface like a bad omen. The sound of ravens croaking in the distance, their black silhouettes stark against the morning sky, added to the sense of desolation that hung over the landscape. As the English colonists emerged from their hiding places, they were met with a scene of utter chaos. The thatched roofs of their homes, once a warm golden brown, now lay charred and blackened. The wooden beams cracked and splintered. The streets, once bustling with activity, were now empty and silent. The only sound, the soft crunch of gravel beneath the feet of the survivors. The temperature was cool, the spring breeze carrying a hint of winter's chill, but the emotional climate was one of numbness, as if the very life had been drained from the people. Governor Francis Wyatt, his face etched with grief and determination, stood amidst the ruins, surveying the damage. His eyes, red-rimmed from lack of sleep, scanned the horizon, taking in the extent of the destruction. The sound of his voice, low and measured, carried across the stillness as he gave orders to his men, directing them to tend to the wounded and bury the dead. The smell of damp earth and decaying flesh hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded. As the days passed, the English colonists set about rebuilding their lives. They worked tirelessly, their hands moving with a newfound sense of purpose, as they cleared the rubble and constructed new homes. The sound of hammers ringing out against the anvil, the smell of freshly cut wood, and the sight of smoke rising from the chimneys all combined to create a sense of hope, a sense that they might yet survive this ordeal. But despite their efforts, the memory of the massacre lingered, a constant presence that haunted their dreams and filled their waking hours with a sense of unease. The survivors, their faces gaunt and haunted, moved with a quiet reverence, as if they were walking on sacred ground. They spoke in hushed tones, their voices barely above a whisper, as if they feared to disturb the spirits of the dead. The sound of their footsteps, echoing off the buildings, was a reminder that they were not alone, that the ghosts of the past still lingered, watching and waiting. The temperature dropped at night, the darkness seeming to press in on them from all sides, but they found comfort in the warmth of the fires that burned in the hearths of their new homes. As the weeks turned into months, the English colonists began to rebuild their community. They worked together, their faces set with determination, as they constructed new homes, planted new crops, and tended to their livestock. The sound of children's laughter, the smell of baking bread, and the sight of flowers blooming in the gardens all combined to create a sense of normalcy, a sense that they might yet find peace in this troubled land. But despite their progress, the conflict with the Native Americans continued, a constant reminder that they were not alone in this vast and unforgiving wilderness. The James River, once a symbol of hope and opportunity, now seemed a reminder of their vulnerability. Its tranquil surface, reflecting the sky above, belied the dangers that lurked beneath, the unseen currents that could sweep a person away in an instant. The sound of its gentle lapping against the shore was a constant presence, a reminder of the power and beauty of nature, but also of its capacity for destruction. As the English colonists looked out upon its waters, they knew that they had to be vigilant, that they had to be prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the seasons passed, the English colonists began to come to terms with their new reality. They knew that they would never be able to go back to the way things were before, that the massacre had changed them forever. The sound of their voices, raised in prayer and song, carried across the landscape, a testament to their resilience and determination. The smell of wood smoke and cooking meat wafted through the air, a reminder of their simple pleasures. And the sight of the sun setting over the James River, casting a golden glow over the landscape, was a reminder of the beauty that still existed in this troubled world. In the end, it was not the massacre that defined them, but their response to it. They had faced their fears, and they had emerged stronger, more resilient, and more determined than ever before. The sound of their footsteps, echoing off into the distance, was a reminder that they would endure, that they would survive, and that they would thrive in this vast and unforgiving wilderness. As the darkness closed in around them, they knew that they would face whatever challenges lay ahead together as a community, and that they would emerge victorious in the end. The silence that followed was a testament to their resolve, a reminder that they would never forget the lessons of the past, and that they would always stand together, united in the face of adversity. As the years went by, the Jamestown Massacre of 1622 became etched in the annals of American history, a pivotal moment that would shape the course of a nation. The event was remembered, distorted, and mythologized, its significance evolving over time like the gentle lapping of waves on the James River's shores. The sound of the river's waters, a constant presence in the lives of the English colonists, still echoes through the centuries, a reminder of the struggles and triumphs of a bygone era. In the decades that followed, the English colonies in Virginia continued to grow, their populations swelling with new arrivals from across the Atlantic. The memory of the massacre, however, never faded, a scar that remained tender to the touch. It was a reminder of the dangers that lurked in the uncharted wilderness, the ever-present threat of violence that hung over the settlers like a specter. The smell of smoke and sweat, the taste of fear and uncertainty, these sensations lingered, a testament to the enduring power of the human experience. As the English colonies expanded, their relationship with the Native American populations became increasingly complex. The legacy of the Jamestown Massacre continued to shape the dynamics between the two groups, a delicate balance of power and mistrust. The English, determined to assert their dominance, pushed westward, their settlements and farms encroaching on Native American lands. The Native Americans, meanwhile, struggled to maintain their way of life, their cultures and traditions threatened by the relentless tide of European colonization. The feel of rough-hewn wood, the sound of axes biting into trees, these sensations evoke the sense of a world in flux, a world where the old and the new coexisted in uneasy harmony. In the centuries that followed, the story of the Jamestown Massacre was retold and reinterpreted, its meaning evolving to suit the needs of a changing world. It was a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of underestimating the power and resilience of Native American populations. It was also a symbol of the enduring spirit of the English colonists, their determination to carve out a new life in the uncharted wilderness. The texture of worn leather, the weight of a well-worn book, these sensations evoke the sense of a story that has been told and retold, a story that has become a part of the very fabric of American history. As the United States grew and prospered, the legacy of the Jamestown Massacre continued to shape the nation's identity. It was a reminder of the complex and often fraught relationship between European colonizers and Native American populations. It was also a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, the ability to persevere in the face of adversity and to build a new life in a new world. The sound of children's laughter, the smell of freshly baked bread, these sensations evoke the sense of a community that has been forged in the fire of adversity, a community that has emerged stronger and more resilient as a result. In the modern era, the Jamestown Massacre is remembered as a pivotal moment in American history, a turning point in the complex and often fraught relationship between European colonizers and Native American populations. It is a reminder of the dangers of cultural insensitivity and the importance of respecting the traditions and ways of life of indigenous peoples. The feel of cool breeze on a summer's day, the sound of birds singing in the trees, these sensations evoke the sense of a world that is at peace, a world where the conflicts of the past have been laid to rest. As we reflect on the legacy of the Jamestown Massacre, we are reminded of the enduring power of the human experience. We are reminded of the importance of respecting the traditions and ways of life of indigenous peoples, and of the need to approach the past with sensitivity and nuance. The texture of rough stone, the sound of waves crashing against the shore, these sensations evoke the sense of a world that is complex and multifaceted, a world where the past and the present coexist in uneasy harmony. In the end, the Jamestown Massacre of 1622 was a moment that changed the course of American history, a moment that continues to shape our understanding of the world today. It was a reminder of the dangers of cultural insensitivity and the importance of respecting the traditions and ways of life of Indigenous peoples. The smell of old books, the feel of yellowed parchment, these sensations evoke the sense of a story that has been told and retold, a story that has become a part of the very fabric of our collective memory. As the darkness gathers and the stars begin to twinkle in the night sky, we are reminded of the enduring power of the human spirit. We are reminded of the importance of respecting the traditions and ways of life of Indigenous peoples, and of the need to approach the past with sensitivity and nuance. The sound of crickets chirping, the feel of a gentle breeze on a summer's night, these sensations evoke the sense of a world that is at peace, a world where the conflicts of the past have been laid to rest. And as we drift off to sleep, surrounded by the shadows of the past, we are reminded of the enduring legacy of the Jamestown Massacre, a legacy that continues to shape our understanding of the world today. The darkness deepens, the silence grows, and the stars shine bright, a reminder of the infinite possibilities that lie ahead and the enduring power of the human spirit to shape the course of history. As the last wisps of sunlight fade from the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the James River, we're left to ponder the legacy of the Jamestown Massacre of